What's up? Peace be with you all, guys. I just wanted to go over the concept of God in Islam and Christianity, and these are the same things that a lot of Christians say as well. So both, I want to stress that no point that I raise here hasn't been raised by sincere people in Christianity. There are lots of sincere people in Christianity and in the Christian church that say the same exact things as sincere Christians, because it's a reality. And I want to go over the logic and also the reasoning that is associated with correctly thinking. And Muslims are encouraged and congratulates the effort. The same one that sincere Christians say. This has led to the publishing of books like The Myth of God Incarnate. Anyways, so all the points that a Muslim will make, you will find that it is supported by sincere Christians and churches themselves and itself. And they support the same exact thing. So it's not the Muslims' intention to reinterpret the Bible. That's not what they're doing. Muslims are not reinterpreting the Bible for a Christian. Muslims just want to point out the exact same things that sincere Christians point out. Same exact things. I know it's chicken scratch, guys. I know. So, let me get a better... normal. All right. So the concept of God. Let's talk more about that. The word God, in terms of logic and reasoning, the word God carries a notion. When you think about it, right? It's like a personality. It's, it's in our mind, what we've grown into believing what a God is. Unfortunately, a lot of people think it's some guy with a big beard, a white guy with a big beard, or like a Superman, which is really unfortunate. But if we can just set aside that, if we can acknowledge the things that are reasonable and logical, so if we can acknowledge the things that are reasonable and logical, that people will admit, for example, that all things are subject to influence. So let's say an attitude of respect seems appropriate. And I'll give you some examples of that, whether it's a fear of touching, power lines like electricity, or a fear of being unhealthy, or your regard for your eating properly. So pretty much in that sense, respect leads to health. So respect leads to success. So in Islam puts the respect relative to the respect of God. In origination and appreciation. For example, you go to the grocer feeds you, but what is it that provides the grocer? Who is it? So if you think in those matters like that, we can have appreciation and respect, which is really important. So there are two attributes of God, of many, that are But these two are said over and over again at the top of the chapters, except for one chapter. There are two attributes. One of the attributes is Ar-Rahman. Ar-Rahman. And Ar-Rahman describes the love of God for both the good and the bad. So God loves those who love him and those who don't love him. Does that make sense to you? So the other attribute is Rahim, in the more personal relationship of God to the one who appreciates the first attribute we just talked about. So it's pretty much saying that God loves and provides for all, right? So if someone tells you that the God of Islam only loves those who love him, that person, and God does not love the unlovely. So whoever says that, the man or person is mistaken. Because God doesn't only love those who love him. He loves everyone. So it's hard to imagine how someone could miss a point like that when it is flashed at the top of each chapter. At the top of each chapter, it's written. And it's flashed right in top of your eyes, except for the, I think it's number 19th chapter. So the love and appreciation of the Muslim for God moves over from an emotional standpoint. It moves over from It moves over from an emotional standpoint into a rational. From an emotional to a rational standpoint. And so it moves from an emotional into a rational basis, and it moves from feeling love to respect. So you see, we cannot help who we love, but we can choose who we respect. So if the Muslim tends to feel that, for example, if God is like a father to him, this attitude moves over to a regard for his master. For the same reasons, we cannot choose our father, but we can choose our master. Does that make sense to you? And in this life, it is our lovers and our fathers, etc., who can sometimes cause us grief. Yep. Grief. But we are not caused any grief by those who deserve our respect and our obedience. So another attribute of God is Ahad in Arabic, and the best English translation for that is probably like the unique, the rare. And it means like unique, it means like the rare. So pretty much what that means is that divinity is wrapped up in identity. God's divinity is wrapped up in his identity. It's completely part of him. Divinity is wrapped up in identity. when it comes to God. So that means that God cannot resign divinity the way someone would resign their office, like someone who has been promoted to an office or something and decides to resign, because it's wrapped up in who God is. It's part of his identity. I'll give you another example of this. Another example would be like, you cannot resign your parenthood. Can you? Can you resign your parenthood? To your kids? It's part of your identity if you have kids. Your children are always going to be your children. You cannot sign that away. You can't resign it. It's wrapped up in who you are. Does that make sense to you? And since divinity cannot be set aside, there are some things that are impossible. Some things are impossible. In terms of our creation, in terms of our reality. And I'm not saying that they're difficult to do. I'm saying they're impossible. And I'm also not saying that they're hard. No, I'm saying that it is impossible. Impossible. Like, they're impossible because they deny themselves. It goes against reason. It goes against logic. Some things, if they are true, then they must be false. Those things are impossible things. If they are true, then they must be false. So these are impossible things. I'll give you an example of that. Mortality denies immortality. If you become immortal, then you are not immortal anymore. You are immortal. That can happen. But it can't work the other way around, because then it would deny itself. Let's say if you are immortal, let's say you are immortal, right? And then you become mortal. So what does that mean? Mortal. So then that means that that person wasn't really immortal in the first place, was he? This was something that was said 17 centuries ago of Jesus. And they said if he died, he wasn't God. If he died, he wasn't God. And if he was God, he didn't die. This is the whole God-man sandwich concept, which cannot be brought into logic and reason. If you think about it, which we will right now, and break it down. It's like, for example, we'll use the sandwich concept. So if you take bread, okay, let's say this is bread. If you take bread and then you put a piece of cheese, Let's do this one. All right. Let's say you put a piece of cheese in there. And you put them together, you have a new reality. It's called a sandwich. So this is a sandwich. So what if I told you that I ate a sandwich except for the bread? So what would that mean? You ate a sandwich except for bread. So then you just ate the cheese. So in the same way, if you tell me that a God man was crucified except for the God, then I'll tell you that then they crucified the man, not a God man. So the point is that God and man are ideas that we can give a meaning to. But a God man is a term of no meaning in our reality, in our reasoning, in our logic. And if the meaning, therefore, it isn't clear, how can we be sure of its truth? So what I'm trying to say is, for example, it's like someone speaking in a foreign language, for example, and we don't know what he's saying. How can we dare say whether he's telling the truth or lying? We don't understand it. So how can we judge its truth value? The truth value is very important. The truth value. So just moving on, we'll talk about something that's related to this. So we'll talk about punishment, punishment and forgiveness. That looks bad. All right, we'll talk about punishment and forgiveness. Because in Islam, a Muslim looks forward to both. He may be punished for his sins or he may be forgiven. But you can't be both punished and forgiven. And I'm trying to say this because of the concept that someone is a baby and born with the sin of his ancestors, so on and so forth. So regarding the subject, the Muslims know that when you offend God, you offend the same one who will judge you, right? So if you offend God, you offend the same one who will judge you. You offend the same one who will judge you. So, God is not like a judge in like a traffic court or something like that, where they'll find someone and then adjourn the court and goes and they pay a fine for the individual. That's nice. If someone would go and pay that for the individual, they find the individual and then they go pay for the individual. That would be nice. But the point is the fine was paid because the state didn't forgive the offender. So the man who is the judge is not the offending party, and he isn't the state. His job is just being a judge. So God is both the judge and the offended party. So God is both the judge and the offended party. So he cannot simultaneously forgive you and demand payment. Does that make sense to you? So that would be like saying, case dismissed, and you're fined. You get it? So when the judge is the offended party, like God, you can't have this idea of, well, he forgives, but he wanted payment. And if you look at the Lord's Prayer that a lot of Christians say, it seems to make it clear in the modern translation where they say, forgive us our debts the way we forgive our debtors. If you forgive a debt, that means what? That means you cancel it. That means you cancel it. Yep. So when the Quran says God forgives whom he wills, it does not describe God as arbitrary. It describes his ability as a judge. So when the Muslims reject the concept of original sin, a Muslim is not rejecting the idea that man has a tendency to do wrong. He is rejecting the idea that a human being is guilty at birth. Guilty at birth. Guilty at birth. So, you're guilty at birth for the sin of your ancestors, right? So the Muslim hopes and expects God to make the same distinction that he makes between punishment and penalties. How you're penalized for your mistakes, how you're punished for your crimes, but not punished for mistakes. So mistakes would involve acts of ignorance. Mistakes are acts of ignorance. A crime means in spite of knowing that it was wrong, you still did it. So in particular, that means that belief cannot be a crime. What you know to be true, a part of what you believe. So how can a man know that this is true but choose to believe that it is false? He knows it's part of what he believes. So the crime is to know something is true, but to act like it isn't. Another crime is choosing not to investigate the possibility that one is wrong. Choosing not to investigate the possibility that one is wrong. So the meaning of the word in the Quran, which believe, means also to confirm, to check on it, to check on the advice that it is giving. So Muslims are not commanded to believe, they are commanded by God to check on it, to verify it, and to confirm it for yourselves. To verify it without using cheap excuses. Without using cheap excuses.